For me is a case of babies having babies, teenagers. If your son is not the child's father and have insisted on a DNA test from the moment you heard Miss Sissom was, and you are emotional already.
Yep. I have a grandson that's 8 months old. He needs his father.
Did your mother know you were having sex?
No, Your Honor.
She was sneaking at my house. She was coming over here lying, conniving, saying, I have a 14-year-old daughter at home. She was sneaking over there, hollering about she was coming over there to see my daughter.
That's a lie, Your Honor.
My son was...
The greatest part about this is you all saying the same thing, blaming the opposite child.
Right.
But really the whole time,
She
she
visited my
having
son.
sex with your son.
Yeah.
If this child is really your grandchild, because I know you want to know that.
See her walking with another guy. My son at school, this is before Destinee said anything about you was pregnant.
You know it's Miss Riley's house where she's going to have. You don't know. She just saying I'm going over my friends.
That's all I
That's
know.
where I am.
That's all
So
I
you
This courtroom story unfolds under the firm guidance of Judge Lauren Lake, where emotions, accusations, and legal responsibility collide on a public stage. The case centers on young parents, deeply involved families, and a child whose future depends on scientific truth rather than assumptions. From the very beginning, the court makes it clear that this is not just about gossip or anger. It is about law, responsibility, and the concept of justice in jurisprudence. Several people appear before the court. A teenage mother arrives seeking legal clarity for her infant child. She is supported by her own mother, who believes the child deserves certainty, stability, and legally recognized support. On the other side stands the alleged father, accompanied by his mother, who strongly disputes the claim and demands a DNA test. The courtroom quickly becomes a space where family pride, denial, fear, and hope all surface at once. This is where many people regret taking the test, yet cannot escape it. Judge Lauren Lake listens carefully as each side explains their version of events. The court examines how the relationship began, how trust broke down, and how doubt entered during the critical window of conception. What initially appears to be a personal dispute transforms into a serious divorce case, style legal conflict, even though marriage may never have existed. The court treats the matter with the same gravity as any other family law proceeding, because a child's future is at stake. As testimony continues, the relationship between law and justice becomes visible. The judge reminds everyone that emotions do not outweigh evidence. Accusations of cheating surface, echoing familiar DNA test cheating stories that dominate podcasts and full episodes across social media. Each party insists they are telling the truth, yet the court recognizes that memory and honesty are often unreliable without proof. The evidence stage in divorce case, style proceedings, is where the focus shifts from blame to facts. Judge Lauren Lake explains that refusing cooperation could result in adverse inference in Evidence Act principles being applied. Silence, denial, or avoidance may legally suggest guilt. This moment highlights why the game-changing attorney podcast and similar platforms often describe DNA cases as life-altering legal crossroads. The alleged father speaks about confusion, betrayal, and fear of being trapped into child support obligations for a child that may not be his. The mother speaks about abandonment, emotional pain, and the need for accountability. Grandmothers on both sides clash over morality, parenting failures, and responsibility, turning the courtroom into a tense family battleground. Judge Lauren Lake repeatedly restores order, reminding everyone that this is not a shouting match. It is a court of law. Throughout the hearing, the judge draws attention to the concept of justice in jurisprudence, explaining that justice is not about who speaks louder or cries harder, but about truth supported by evidence. She emphasizes that many people walk into court believing their version of events is enough, only to learn that legal systems rely on verification, not belief. As the court prepares for the DNA results, the atmosphere changes. The room becomes quiet, heavy with anticipation. This is the moment often discussed in the Truth Changes Everything podcast, the point where speculation ends and reality begins. Judge Lauren Lake explains the legal consequences that will follow regardless of the outcome, including custody considerations, child support, and long-term parental responsibility recognized even by the Supreme Court child support standards. When the DNA results are finally revealed, the truth confirms biological parentage. The courtroom reacts instantly. For one side, relief arrives. For the other, denial collapses. This is where people truly regret taking the test, yet also realize that certainty is unavoidable. The judge makes it clear that the DNA result is not a punishment. It is a foundation for the child's future. Judge Lauren Lake then addresses the emotional aftermath. She speaks directly to the adults, criticizing immaturity, avoidance, and the failure to protect the child from chaos. Her words resemble celebrate recovery testimonies, emphasizing accountability, growth, and learning from mistakes rather than repeating them. She stresses that the court's role is not to shame, but to ensure the child does not become collateral damage. The ruling establishes legal fatherhood, opening the door to structured child support and parental duties. The judge also highlights how similar cases appear in Adoption Stories full episodes, where unresolved paternity creates lifelong trauma. She urges the parties to move forward responsibly, reminding them that the court can assign rights, but cannot force emotional maturity. This case stands as a powerful example of how DNA tests reshape lives. It mirrors themes often discussed in the Divorce Course podcast, where unresolved trust issues evolve into legal warfare. Judge Lauren Lake closes by reinforcing that justice was served not because someone won an argument, but because the truth was confirmed. In the end, the courtroom clears, but the impact remains. A child now has legal identity. Adults are forced to face reality, and the audience is left with a lasting lesson. In court, emotions fade, arguments collapse, but evidence speaks, and once it does, there is no going back. As the courtroom proceedings move forward, Judge Lauren Lake shifts the focus from the shock of the DNA results to what the law requires next. The case no longer revolves around doubt or accusation. It now becomes about responsibility, structure, and long-term impact. This transition is critical because many people enter court believing the DNA test is the end of the story, when in reality, it is only the beginning. The confirmed biological father now stands before the court not just as a participant, but as a legally recognized parent. Judge Lauren Lake explains that this status carries enforceable obligations under family law. Child support is no longer optional or emotional. It is statutory. The judge outlines how Supreme Court child support principles guide lower courts, ensuring that a child's basic needs are met regardless of personal conflict between adults. On the other side, the mother listens as the court clarifies that proof of paternity strengthens her legal position, but also brings expectations. The court does not operate as a weapon against one parent. Instead, it establishes balance. Judge Lauren Lake emphasizes that parenting is not about winning in court, but about sustaining a child's well-being outside of it. This explanation reflects the deeper relationship between law and justice, where fairness is measured by outcomes for the child, not emotional satisfaction for adults. Family members who previously fueled chaos are now addressed directly. The grandmothers, whose arguments dominated earlier moments, are reminded that the court does not recognize emotional ownership. Judge Lauren Lake explains that while extended family can support a child, legal authority rests with the parents. This moment often shocks families, especially those who believed loyalty or financial help gave them control. In many DNA test people regret taking scenarios. This realization is the most painful. The judge then revisits the behavior displayed during testimony. She points out inconsistencies, emotional manipulation, and selective memory. Without naming podcasts directly, her words echo themes from the Game-Changing Attorney podcast, where legal experts warn that credibility matters long before DNA results are read. How a person behaves in court influences future custody and visitation decisions. As the case continues, Judge Lauren Lake explains that refusing cooperation earlier could have triggered adverse inference in Evidence Act reasoning. She reminds everyone that courts are allowed to draw conclusions when parties avoid testing or delay truth. This legal explanation transforms the courtroom into a learning space, where viewers understand that silence can be as damaging as dishonesty. Attention then turns to the emotional aftermath for the child. Judge Lauren Lake speaks firmly about identity, stability, and emotional safety. She references how unresolved paternity disputes often surface later in life, appearing in adoption stories, full episodes, and recovery narratives, where adults struggle with abandonment and unanswered questions. Her message is clear. Today's conflict must not become tomorrow's trauma. The alleged cheating that once dominated the narrative is reframed. Judge Lauren Lake explains that while infidelity may damage trust, it does not define parental obligation. This distinction is crucial in many DNA test cheating stories, where people mistakenly believe moral judgment replaces legal responsibility. The court separates personal betrayal from parental duty, reinforcing the concept of justice in jurisprudence. The father is given a moment to speak about fear and regret. He admits uncertainty, pressure, and the weight of sudden responsibility. Judge Lauren Lake listens but does not soften the ruling. She acknowledges emotion without allowing it to override law. This balance mirrors discussions often heard on the Truth Changes Everything podcast, where guests describe how courts validate feelings but enforce facts. Next, the judge addresses future cooperation. She warns that continued hostility could lead to structured visitation schedules, supervised exchanges, or further court intervention. This is where the case resembles a divorce case, even without marriage. Judge Lauren Lake explains that family courts prioritize predictability and peace for children, sometimes over parental preference. The courtroom atmosphere shifts again as the judge discusses long-term planning. She outlines how child support adjustments work, how education and medical costs may be shared, and how failure to comply can result in enforcement actions. These explanations are clinical but necessary, reminding everyone that court orders are not suggestions. Many parents later discuss this moment in the Divorce Course podcast, describing it as the point where reality finally set in. Judge Lauren Lake also addresses the emotional healing process. While the court cannot provide therapy, she encourages counseling, parenting classes, and community support. Her tone briefly resembles Celebrate Recovery testimonies, where acknowledgement of mistakes becomes the first step toward growth. She emphasizes that accountability is not punishment, it is preparation for better outcomes. As the hearing nears its conclusion, Judge Lauren Lake reflects on the broader lesson. She states that DNA testing exists to protect children, not embarrass adults. She notes that many enter court seeking validation, only to discover that the law is indifferent to ego. This is why the phrase "truth changes everything" resonates so deeply in these cases. The judge formally issues her orders. Legal fatherhood is established. Child support proceedings are authorized. Future disputes must return to court rather than erupt in personal conflict. With the gavel strike, the legal chapter closes, but the human story continues. The courtroom slowly empties, yet the impact lingers. A child now has a legally recognized parent. Adults leave carrying both relief and regret, and the audience understands something fundamental. DNA does not just reveal biology, it reshapes lives, responsibilities, and futures in ways no argument ever could. As the case reaches its final phase, Judge Lauren Lake makes it clear that the courtroom is not a place for celebration or defeat, but for resolution. The emotional storm that dominated earlier moments has settled into something heavier: acceptance. This is often the point discussed in the Truth Changes Everything podcast, where guests explain that learning the truth is easier than accepting what follows. Judge Lauren Lake addresses the parents one last time, explaining that the court's responsibility extends beyond today's ruling. The law now recognizes a legal parent-child relationship, and that recognition carries permanent consequences. The judge explains how child support is calculated, enforced, and adjusted over time, grounding her explanation in principles commonly upheld by the Supreme Court Child Support Framework. These obligations exist to protect the child, not to punish either parent. The courtroom listens as Judge Lauren Lake explains that denial after DNA confirmation serves no purpose. She reminds the parties that many people regret taking the DNA test because it removes the comfort of uncertainty. Yet without that certainty, a child's life remains unstable. This is why courts insist on science over speculation, especially in emotionally charged family disputes. The judge then turns her attention to the broader behavior displayed throughout the hearing. She explains how hostility, disrespect, and public arguments damage credibility. These actions matter beyond this case, because family court records influence future rulings. This reality is often highlighted in the Game-Changing Attorney podcast, where legal professionals stress that how someone behaves in court can matter as much as what they say. Judge Lauren Lake emphasizes the relationship between law and justice, noting that justice is not emotional satisfaction. Justice is structure, accountability, and consistency. She explains that while feelings are valid, they do not override legal duty. This distinction is central to the concept of justice in jurisprudence, where fairness is measured by outcomes rather than intent. The conversation shifts toward long-term consequences for the child. Judge Lauren Lake warns that unresolved resentment often resurfaces later in life, echoing themes seen in adoption stories' full episodes, where adults describe growing up without clarity about identity or belonging. She states plainly that today's maturity will shape the child's emotional future. As the court prepares to conclude, Judge Lauren Lake discusses cooperation. She explains that shared parenting, even in strained relationships, reduces the need for repeated court involvement. Failure to cooperate, she warns, can lead to stricter orders, reduced flexibility, and court-monitored arrangements. These warnings reflect realities commonly discussed in the Divorce Course podcast, where unresolved conflict keeps families trapped in litigation. The judge revisits earlier accusations of infidelity. She clarifies that cheating may damage trust, but it does not erase biological responsibility. Many DNA test cheating stories begin with moral outrage and end with legal obligation. The court does not rule on character, it rules on facts. Judge Lauren Lake reinforces that distinction to ensure clarity moving forward. She also explains that refusal to acknowledge results or continued public denial can harm the child emotionally. Courts view such behavior as contrary to the child's best interest. In extreme cases, it may influence custody or visitation decisions. This reminder underscores why legal cooperation matters long after the DNA envelope is opened. Judge Lauren Lake pauses to speak about personal accountability. Her tone shifts briefly from legal to reflective, echoing the spirit of Celebrate Recovery testimonies, where individuals confront their mistakes to move forward. She explains that accountability is not humiliation, it is growth. Parents who accept responsibility early spare their children years of confusion. The court then addresses enforcement. Judge Lauren Lake outlines how failure to comply with court orders can lead to wage garnishment, legal penalties, or further hearings. These consequences are not threats but mechanisms to protect the child's rights. The judge makes it clear that court orders are binding, not symbolic. As final remarks approach, Judge Lauren Lake speaks directly about the emotional weight of DNA testing. She acknowledges that many people come to court hoping science will confirm their beliefs. When it does not, the disappointment can be overwhelming. This is why people often say they regret taking the test. Yet she emphasizes that uncertainty causes more damage than truth ever could. The judge reiterates that the evidence stage in divorce case style proceedings exists to eliminate doubt. Evidence does not choose sides. It reveals reality. When people try to manipulate or avoid evidence, courts may apply adverse inference in Evidence Act principles, drawing conclusions based on avoidance itself. Transparency, she reminds them, is always safer than resistance. With all legal explanations complete, Judge Lauren Lake delivers her final instructions. The legal relationship is established. Responsibilities are assigned. Future disputes must return to court rather than escalate privately. The gavel strikes, marking the end of the legal process. As the courtroom empties, the emotional consequences linger. One parent leaves carrying the weight of responsibility they once resisted. Another leaves with validation, but also the burden of cooperation. Extended family members leave quieter than they arrived, having learned that emotion does not override law. The child, though unaware, leaves with something priceless: certainty, a legal identity, a recognized future. This outcome reflects why courts exist and why DNA testing, despite fear and regret, remains essential. In the end, this case becomes a living example of why the phrase "truth changes everything" is repeated so often. It changes relationships. It changes obligations. It changes futures. And while many people walk into court hopping for vindication, they walk out with something far more important: clarity. This courtroom story under Judge Lauren Lake does not end with celebration or defeat. It ends with responsibility. And that, above all else, is what justice looks like.